you have open studios, and what might you make of those kind of moments of informality within your practice? How might your curiosities help to be fed by these more informal parts of the artist-in-residence structure? How might your practice be informed by having a group of other artists that you would travel on this journey with over the period of time that you're here? How might your practice be served by that, what I like to call it, like, you know, diamonds are made from pressure. So the pressure of having some kind of end product, even if you don't know what that might look like, a 30-minute play, or, you know, that this is where your story, I feel like, comes into play. I've been working in this kind of way, and I want to see what would happen if. A clarity around the questions is as important as a clarity around, I know I want to do X, Y, Z, because this is a space that provides a lot of opportunities to contend with those questions in small, intimate settings, in a little bit more public settings, in one-on-one meetings, in larger, sort of more public spectacle space. And so how might that be of use is important within your storytelling.
I think there's also something like to being like transparent, even about how your one is lost, you know? Like I sort of entered this residency like right before I like transitioned and sort of like came out publicly as like an anti-Zionist, which then became the two very central things to my work. And I sort of like knew that that was gonna happen, but was like, I can't tell a panel before I tell my mom, you know? So it was like, I found very peculiar ways to like write my then pronoun and put a question mark after. Like I found all these ways to be like, hi, this is a point of deep questioning for me, but that's why I need this space, you know? Like, which is how I feel like this space works. Not like many other like applications where you sort of have to show a certain level of faux,
Yeah, cut and pasting whatever you applied for at some other place, it's not exactly going to work here.
While we're having this conversation, let me talk about work samples. Work samples are required in both the Space Grant and the artist-in-residence. And work samples are tricky. I work with artists all the time about choosing work samples. It's painful to choose what you think will represent yourself best. My answer to that is think about telling your story from the first question of the application through the last question, which is your work sample. Your work sample should just give us a little bit more about understanding who you are, how you create, and what you might want to make. Now, it can be of the work that you're working on and that you're applying with. And if you're at that point, that's great. That's super. In choosing excerpts, I would just really advise you to think about it, maybe even start with the last question first so that you don't put yourself under the pressure of having to figure out a work sample when it's due in about 3 hours. It's hard to do that. I really understand that, but I have this adage in my own professional life of go with the thing that I least want to do at the beginning of the day. And when I follow my own advice, it always works for me. So perhaps starting from the work sample and then going back to the narrative, which is, for me anyway, easier to do, it may not be for you. If you know what you want to make, yes, please share that with us. If there's a draft of it, if there was a showing of it, be careful of work samples that are too dark. It is hard for panelists that don't know you to see. That's particularly difficult with durational work, with work that live is that delicious Durationality, is that a word?
It is now.
To a word, it is now. We're live, you're traveling through that process. But in 3 minutes or 5 minutes, you're not. So, and if you're not sure, ask a couple of friends, you know, just ask a couple of friends and just say, which would you choose? Just, there is no expert advice on this. Everyone chooses differently. Everyone's aesthetic tastes are different. Ask some friends. Just say, you know, which reads best to you. If you are not showing us what you are already engaged in, but previous work, just make sure that the quality of the work is somehow related to what you say you're ready to do. For example, if you're applying with a highly experimental form of a made-up language, and I'm really going to go way out on a limb here, and bodies performing in handstands, and then you're going to show us a very traditional two-person play of people just doing lines back and forth with one another. We don't get to see what you are up to. However, we have had successful applications where someone has done that, but acknowledged that they've done that. There is a field to be able to talk to us about your work sample, where you say, I acknowledge, I know that this is a very traditional form, and I know that I've written about a very experimental form. And what you can't see here, but what I want you to know, talk to us about it, okay? You're also welcome to go into the rehearsal studio and give us a rough tape. We are not invested in you spending a lot of money or having high production values. We would prefer that to a video that's a lot of cuts and is more of commercial value because we can't see your work as thoroughly and we can't see your vision as thoroughly. We would rather it just be rough in a rehearsal studio. Other questions?
I have a question.
Please.
About the work samples.
Sure.
Because this always kind of gets me. Is
Sucks.
So just kind of as an example, a lot of the footage and work samples that I have to offer are of myself as an actor in theater.
Right.
And a lot of what I'm interested in doing is about like taking my experience in collaborative theater and taking more of a like facilitator role, directorial role, maybe like a writer role. And so I always get like kind of confused about like what I have to show you is my acting, but what I want to be doing in a residency or in a space grant is not necessarily like me standing there like saying lines. But so sometimes I wonder like would it be better to submit some writing?
There is the ability to submit writing as well. You can share some writing with us, and that's in the application. But that's a particularly good question, and there have been countless unsuccessful applications where, particularly when someone is applying as a playwright, for example, and they haven't written anything that they've shared with us yet, and we wind up seeing them as a performer. There is no way for a panel to evaluate them. It's really, really hard. So my suggestion would be to get a few collaborators in a room and to create something, even if it's short, even if it's rough, that you think does exemplify something that you are applying for.
I'm curious about this, so we're gonna just be transparent about, I'm sort of asking you a question too, but my response would also be, if you're talking about being an actor in devised ensemble work, I would have a curiosity about as a panelist, I would have curiosity about if you presented a piece of work that you're like, well, this is actually text that I developed in the creative
Yes,
process
definitely.
that then I performed, then that for me would be a different story. You would just have to tell me that. That
That's
makes the
absolutely
connections.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's absolutely true.
yeah.
When it doesn't work is when someone doesn't go the distance and to let us know that.
Right,
And then we go, who wrote that?
yeah.
Is that the voice of the applicant? Or did someone else write that?
Yeah, it is helpful to know that you can, and you're encouraged to like make comments on what you submit, because I have had that fear of like, I know that this clip of me on stage is not just me acting, I know that like I developed this whole physical vocabulary, we all work together to make this, but if you don't know that, it just looks like an actor being like, this is me acting.
Tell us.
So, yeah.
Tell us. Yes.
Do you want to go first?
Oh, we'll do this and then this. How's that?
I guess, I don't know if it fully relates to the BAX application, but this question around like who is your audience and like who's the work for, I guess, yeah, I guess like frustrations with that as far.
We don't ask that question.
I guess like within that question, for me personally, I guess like trying to relate that with like a language of just like, yeah, I'm sorry, not sorry, but just trying to, guess like figure that out. I guess like, yeah, within this question of who is the audience, if like, saying like the demographic of the institution doesn't co-align with what you think your audience is, or who is it?
If that's an important part of what you're investigating and is a question for you, there are questions within the application that you can incorporate that, for sure. And now that I understand the question, because I let you speak, sorry, I'm sorry I interrupted you, that would be important for you to talk about. I think it's a really good question. How does the institution meet you? Go for it.
Yeah, and I think you can pose like a challenge.
Yes,
I-
right. Go for it.
Like, there hasn't been this, I wanna do this, and like, I wanna discover as part of my residency, how to make it different.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this is a space, at least in my experience of it, and also in the way that I would be visioning and the way we've been talking about visioning. The people who come to the space also make the space. So that's aligned to the mission. So if we're talking about answering these questions about like, well, why BAX? Maybe, well, I see there's a potential for BAX to open up in these kinds of ways. And that's why. Yeah.
I'm going to go here and then over there.
Okay, yes, you mentioned to be careful of work samples that are too dark. Can
Yes.
you clarify a little
Yes.
what you meant by that?
Sometimes the lighting is such that it's very difficult to see the action that's
Okay.
going on.
Or shaky,
I literally.
Okay, that was longer.
Oh, thank you, somebody else might have thought the same thing, thank you. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Along the question of sort of like us answering why BAX, and then standing or sitting next to this beautiful example of the decades of work that has been produced here, my question is like, why did you choose this line of people? And how has that changed from the beginning and the founding of this mission? And wondering, I mean, it seems like there's a really strong through line of anti-racist, anti-oppressive work. And that feels like it's always been at the core. And I'm wondering, within that mission, how have the nuances changed? And what is happening now, you feel, for you?
You got about 10 hours.
That's a workshop.
That's a whole day. This was weekend.
It is the thing, it is the thing. I would say that thematically, this is original work. It is, rather than remakes of something else. This is not the creation of a dance repertory, you know. This is not a Shakespeare remake. This is original, experimental, meaning a time to experiment. Not necessarily in its product, but a time to experiment work and artists. Where they entered from is very different when I look at that board. They were not all at the same point. Some of them had been, similarly to Utah. Shannon's over there on the right, second row down, had been space grantees who became artists in residence, who discovered us in one way and decided this was their home. We got to know them as well, so there's the other side of it. And when they made the decision that they wanted to be in residence here, we knew that there was something fertile and that not only could that artist grow, but we could grow as an organization. I would say that not every artist in residence, but many artists in residence have been part of pushing BAX to be honest and real and accountable. Sometimes it's not evident immediately, but I would say it's always evident eventually. Some people came to us through their teaching practice. Some people were attracted to us because it's also a multi-generational space. Some people have no interest in that. But these are all, God, that's such a big question. It's such a big question. I mean, when I look at this, I look at it very lovingly. There's so many stories on that wall. So it's like, who wants to tell their story here? One and then two.
Hi, thank you. My question, I have two questions. One is about bringing in other people to collaborate with, but not in a sense of as a collaboration, but more as if I run workshops as well, so I'm interested in bringing in as part of my research process some workshops that could end up being performative. Is that common among, is that supported along this residency? And my second question, well, maybe I'll ask that.
Yes, people have done that very regularly. Sometimes it's specifically about the project that they're working on and their need to bring other people into that process, whether it's called a formal workshop or not. And sometimes it's a bit adjunctive but related to a project. One of our artists in residence right now, Luciana Ajugar, is also doing a workshop called Pleasure Practice, which is her practice.
Oh yeah,
Yes, the answer is yes.
great. My second question is, in the past, have there been any comedy artists that have come here? Stand-up comedian as well. So I was just curious about that space here.
Aaron, a little bit.
I don't think she would call herself that.
Who's that?
Okay, never know, sorry. Erin Markey. I don't think Erin would call themselves a stand-up comic necessarily.
Right, but they use like
They
direct
use a lot of
address and
direct address
laughs.
and comedy. Judith Sloan certainly did. I don't know how to answer that in a cut and dry
Yeah.
way.
No, that's great. I'll look up those two. Thank you.
Sure. Yes?
Yes, if you organize a group of actors to perform, and those actors, some or does not show up to the rehearsals, and because as an actor I am committed and I have control of myself. So what do you do if your actors does not show up to the groups and shows?
I'm not sure,
Plan B,
because I don't
or-
know the nature of your work. I mean, BAX doesn't take the responsibility of there are some playwriting residencies, for example, I can think of several, that have groups of actors and they help make marriages between playwrights and actors or playwrights and directors. We don't do that. You are
Control of your,
you're the
the
generative
actors, yes.
person, yes.
okay.
So I could have a personal conversation with you about that, but
Yeah.
it's not necessarily part of this process.
Okay.
Okay. Yes?
Another question, thank you. Do you think about, since you're so interactive with the people that you are having a residency with, it seems very important, the combination of artists that are here at the time. Do you think about that in the applications, about people as a group being, diverse or similar, or how do you put the panel together that it's really feeding each other? And I assume you think about that when you put the panel.
Yes, and yes.
Okay.
Initially, the applications are evaluated on the strength of individual applications. As it moves further in the process, and frankly in eliminations,
Right.
that becomes pretty central to what the final decisions are. And particularly in the artists in residence, the panel recommends twice the number of spots that we have, and then there's an interview process. And during that interview process, there's a great deal of attention paid to imagining the artists who are returning for a second year and the artists who are applying to enter that program, and imagining them and what they have to not just give each other, but get from one another in a cohort environment. Yes, over here, then we'll go back over there.
So, couple questions. First of all, I just wanted to kind of return to when your name asked about this over here, and your response, or some of the response was like, how much time do we have? And so, for myself, being, I think, an artist in transition, like, performed for many, many years with Reggie Wilson, with
Yes,
lots of people.
I've seen you.
And thinking about how best to, in an application, talk about that and talk about the process of trying to talk about the things that you're trying to work on. And are there any no's about time? Does the application allow you enough time to talk about that, or does it happen in the second stage of the interviews? Really, how much time do you have in an application to really
It's an
talk
interesting
about?
question. It has word counts,
Okay.
and submittable will cut you off.
Okay.
And that is a challenge. On the other hand, it's also being kind and humane to the readers and panelists that are reviewing. And if they're reviewing 20 applications, we try to make it so that they also have the time to spend time with your application. So it's a tricky thing. I think the word